A boy is reincarnated in another world, but his life in this magical world is worse than the mediocre life he led in Japan. So we start. A young Haruto bids farewell to a little Mi, promising to come back when he's older to marry her so they can always be together. Amid sobs, Mi is glad that she'll see her best friend again. In the present, a teenage Haru travels by bus, lost in his thoughts when he notices a girl behind him. As they both rise to greet each other, a train blocks their path and wrecks the bus they're on. Upon waking up, Haruto finds himself as a long-haired child in tattered clothes. Confused about his surroundings, he begins to recall memories of his past life as Haruto, where he died in a traffic accident. Now named Ryo, he's in the kingdom of Beltram, in the holy year 991, living in a dirty slum to avenge his mother. Despite memories of his life as Haruto resurfacing, Ryo struggles to retain his own memories. We learn that his black hair is unusual in those parts because he and his family come from a distant place called Yagumo. However, Ryo never got to know Yagumo, as his mother's promise to travel there faded when they ended her life. Three men enter where Ryo is, and despite nearly succumbing to fever the day before and being hungry, they don't even offer him a bite of bread. Instead, they tell him to leave because his smell ruins their appetite. While Ryo searches for berries to eat, a group of 4 girls of different ages dressed in white robes appear. Hostilely, they ask if he's seen a girl with purple hair, and he assures them he hasn't. Then one of the girls named Celia says they can't ask him so harshly because he'll never answer truthfully. She asks him kindly for his name, how life is in the slums, and again about the girl with purple hair. Ryo responds better, but he's never seen that girl either. He advises them not to search for her in the slums dressed so elegantly as they might run into trouble. So, the girls decide to change clothes, but before that, they ask Celia to use her powers to see if there's any magic nearby. Celia creates a magical circle on the ground and claims she hasn't found another source of magic but does detect a large amount of mana in Ryo's body, indicating he can use magic, which surprises Ryo, who clearly wasn't aware. Celia thanks him for the information and gives him a bag of silver coins before they leave. Ryo snaps out of his confusion about magic and hides the bag of coins in his chest, then runs off. Upon entering the house where he lives with the men who didn't give him food, he's attacked by a masked man who stabs him in the chest, breaking the bag of coins. The masked man stands before him ready to finish him off when a girl appears above him, advising Ryo on how to use his mana to strengthen his body. After giving him a kiss, the girl disappears. Ryo gains great strength and manages to hit the masked man. The masked man also has magic, and both start to fight. Ryo suddenly displays astonishing abilities and strength and manages to defeat him. Then he hears something moving in a large bag left by his companions. Opening it, he finds the girl with purple hair, realizing she's the one they were looking for. He removes the gag from her mouth, and the girl begs him to take her to the castle, claiming her father will reward him greatly. Then he sees the bodies of the victims of the place and faints. Ryo decides to carry her on his shoulders and heads to the village to take the girl when he runs into the 4 girls in robes. One of them sees him and slaps him, claiming he lied about the girl's whereabouts. Ryo hands over the girl, whom we learn is named Flora, and her sister Christina insists on arresting him, thinking he's the culprit. However, the eldest of the group insists on hearing his story and they'll take him to the castle. Despite Ryo's refusal, he has no other choice and ends up going. Meanwhile, the royal guard, led by Alfred, finds the masked man who has already regained consciousness and hopes to question him about what happened. Then, a hooded man breaks a red stone, causing the masked man to lose his life immediately, and then leaves. At the castle, the eldest of the girls, Vanessa, assures him they'll conduct a fair and courteous interrogation. However, the one in charge of the interrogation is a royal guard named Charles, who tortures Ryo, accusing him of being an accomplice and forcing him to provide information. Princess Flora wakes up and immediately orders them to take Ryo to a safe place, as she owes her life to that boy. When Vanessa arrives, she realizes Charles is a sadist who has beaten him to a pulp. After scolding him, Celia uses her magic to heal every wound on Ryo's body. When Ryo wakes up in a room in the royal palace with no injuries, he doesn't understand what's happening. Celia explains and then tells him he'll have to appear before the king. So Ryo asks her to teach him the protocols, and Celia says she'll do it cheerfully. Hours later, Ryo, elegantly dressed to everyone's surprise, stands before the king. In gratitude for saving Flora, and even though Ryo's academic aptitude hasn't been assessed, they allow him to study at the Royal Academy of Ballroom. Celia takes charge of showing him around, and upon learning that he can't read or write, she tells him that she will personally take care of teaching him. With that said, Celia, as the class teacher, introduces Ryo to the rest of the class. Ryo introduces himself, mentioning that he's on a scholarship and hopes to get along with everyone. However, since they're all children of royalty or nobles in that academy, many of the kids mock and laugh at him for being poor. Also present is Christina, Flora's sister, who looks at him with disdain, still convinced that he's involved in Flora's kidnapping. After class, Ryo goes to Celia's office to learn to read. There he finds out that Celia is only 12 years old but is so intelligent that she's a teacher and has read hundreds and hundreds of books. Celia gives him some arithmetic problems to solve, and Ryo solves them easily, to Celia's surprise, as the only one in his class who can solve them is Christina. Ryo knows it's because he still has knowledge from his previous life, where he was already a college student, although he lies saying his mother taught him. Later, they have tea, and Celia insists that if he has any problems, he should tell her, but Ryo says everything is fine, although both know that his classmates have made derogatory comments about him. Then, Ryo asks her to lend him books to learn to read, even though if he has knowledge from his previous life, he should know how to read, but well. In combat practice, Ryo fights against the teacher, and he asks them to fight as they see fit. Ryo remembers his master's teachings and has a tough battle with the teacher. The rest of the students watch, and the usual ones make some comments saying he fights in a vulgar way. However, the teacher assures him that he has the makings of a knight. Ryo accepts the compliment but claims he doesn't want to be a knight, which surprises many, but especially annoys those who constantly mock him. The day of the exams arrives, and Ryo has been studying too hard. In the hallways, everyone looks at him and whispers about him, and this worsens when the exam scores are posted, and Ryo has the best grades along with Christina. Alphonse, the boy who always mocks him, calls him a cheater in front of everyone, but Celia intervenes, ensuring that she can attest that Ryo has been studying hard for the exam. Later, Celia worries about how they mistreat Ryo, but he reassures her, saying he's used to it, and then tells her that besides being his teacher, she's his friend. 5 years later, the Knights tournament is approaching, and the three chosen are Alphonse, Ryo, and some other random guy who never shows up. Alphonse gets angry, obviously because Ryo was chosen, but the teacher sets him straight. Celia tells him that if he does well, the Knights can recruit him, but once again Ryo assures that he doesn't want to be a knight. His plan is to leave the country that has hurt him so much to travel to Yagumo, where his parents lived. Celia is surprised that he's going to a place alongside barbarism, as she calls it. At the Knights tournament, Ryo faces Charles, the knight who tortured him 5 years ago. Charles gets angry because he missed a promotion due to what happened, and also, Ryo fights without a shield because he has another technique, so Charles thinks he's mocking him and fights with all his might, which doesn't seem so legal because he's fighting students. Despite that, Ryo ends up winning, and although Charles doesn't want to, he must accept that he has lost. Later, Charles discusses this with the ambassador from the Empire of Proxia, and then we learn that it was him who used the red stone to take the masked man's life. Later, Celia tries to celebrate with Ryo but becomes saddened when she sees a girl handing him a letter that seems to be a love letter. Celia reads in some exams what each one's plans are after graduation and worries when she sees that Ryo is the only one who hasn't written anything. In class, Celia talks about magic and how it can be controlled through techniques, then says they will start learning the lightning spell. Alphonse interrupts to say that it's a too basic spell and they shouldn't delay the class for just one person who doesn't know, alluding to Ryo, of course. Then Alphonse and his friend demonstrate, and Celia tells them that if that's all they can do, it means they don't have it fully mastered, and then she demonstrates using various spells at once. Ryo thinks to himself that although he doesn't know magic, he can still reproduce spells by imitating the flow of magic. At the end of class, Alphonse's friend confronts Ryo, saying he knows he's seducing girls in the class and that his family won't tolerate it. Celia stops him, saying he can't accuse without evidence, and Ryo says nothing and stays put to avoid conflicts. However, the boy calls him a commoner and threatens him. Flora feels bad that Ryo can't do anything and has to tolerate such treatment, and her sister tells her she understands that the accusation is unfounded and wrong, but they shouldn't intervene anyway. Later, they have outdoor training, which involves making a long journey through the mountains and reaching the goal before nightfall. In charge of the training is Alphonse, who says he has found an alternative route based on information from the commoners of his castle. Although a girl confronts him to say that would be cheating, the rest agree to follow his plan. Before they start, Alphonse's bully friend tells Rio that they are doing him a favor by letting him train with them even though he can't use magic, and asks him to carry everyone else's bags. Flora approaches to help him, but Rio reassures her saying he doesn't mind, although he appreciates the intention. On the way, they come across a group of goblins, and using magic to enhance their bodies, they easily defeat them. During the fight, Rio is distracted looking elsewhere, and Alphonse insults him as useless, but Rio had seen the ambassador of the Red Stone. The ambassador is surprised that Rio noticed him from such a distance and decides to continue investigating him to see how far his abilities go. When the group reaches what they thought was the goal, they realize that the information was wrong because they are facing a cliff. While they decide what to do, a large group of orcs with giant spears appears. One of them manages to injure the bully, and while he complains about the pain, he pushes Flora towards the cliff. At that moment, Rio saves her, but he falls into the ravine himself. However, using something that is not magic but he doesn't know what it is either, he manages to fall without problems and without injuries. After defeating the orcs, which was not so easy, the group talks about how the bully pushed Flora, but he defends himself by blaming the commoner, that is, Rio, and everyone agrees with him, although they know it's not true, but well, to avoid problems, nobody cares about that commoner. Rio observes this from afar and realizes he won't be able to return to the academy, although he doesn't mind so much. The rest of the group continues their way, and Flora is sure she'll look for Rio even if she has to go alone. At that moment, an even worse monster appears, and despite using all their powers, many end up injured and decide to escape. They leave Flora behind caring for an injured person. Then the monster appears in front of Flora, and she sees her life flash before her eyes. But at that moment, Rio appears and, after a fierce and very difficult battle, manages to destroy the monster, only in front of Flora's eyes. Seeing the group returning, Rio leaves. Hidden, the ambassador is curious to see Rio's capabilities and wonders if he comes from Yagumo, as that would explain his ability to use spiritual arts. Later, Charles, who hates Rio, along with the bully, decide to talk to the king and come to the conclusion of blaming Rio for everything that happened. Although the king knows that Flora defends Rio, he decides to blame him to avoid problems. Before leaving for Yagumo, Rio says goodbye to Celia, assuring her that he will write to her. Illegally, Charles sends a fur named Latifa to pursue Rio to capture him. After 3 days of traveling, Rio has arrived at a mercantile city called Amanda. Wanted posters with his face are displayed in different places, making it challenging to get what he needs for the journey. During the trip, he senses a presence but attributes it to his tension, unaware that Latifa is too close to him. In the market, he sees pasta similar to ramen and other foods that remind him of his previous world, where they haven't been seen. The vendor tells him they are creations of Lieselot and shows him where to buy in bulk for his journey. He is attended by a servant who is delighted to see someone with black hair and gets along wonderfully with him. After buying supplies, he asks for help to send a letter to Celia and leaves. The servant is none other than Lieselot, but Rio leaves without realizing it. As he continues his journey, he comes across the body of a girl lying on the ground in the middle of the forest. When he bends down to help her, he realizes she is a beast girl, Latifa, who manages to throw a poison dart at him. Rio neutralizes the poison before it takes effect. Then they engage in a fierce and fast battle, almost too fast to see what they are doing. Rio manages to find her weakness and defeat her, although it's not easy. As Latifa begins to cry because she doesn't want to lose her life, Rio puts her to sleep with magic and disarms her. He notices a slavery collar around her neck. Remembering a spell from a book, he breaks the collar. It is revealed that Latifa was Suzun, the girl from the bus that crashed into the train in a past life, but when she woke up in this world, she was enslaved and tortured by the bully. When Latifa wakes up in the present, Rio asks her who sent her, and she claims it was Stewart, the bully, who calls himself her brother. Rio understands everything upon hearing this and advises her not to follow anyone's orders anymore and lets her go. He advises her to go to the world of the barbarians, where humans and semi-humans coexist, because if she stays in the nearby kingdoms, she will only be enslaved again. Latifa starts following Rio because she feels lonely, and although Rio initially wants to distance her, he ends up accepting to travel together. Latifa eats real food for the first time and is moved to tears. That night, while Rio cooks for both of them, Latifa recognizes the spaghetti, which catches Rio's attention. Later, she has nightmares while sleeping and expresses her desire to return home to Tokyo, confirming Rio's suspicions that she is from the other world. The next morning, Latifa sees Rio sleeping and remembers the young man from the bus. Both continue their journey, getting closer to a giant magical tree, until one night, in the middle of the night, a giant wolf appears in front of them. The wolf in front of Rio emits a bright beam of light that blinds him. When the light finally disappears and he can see again, he finds himself surrounded by semi-humans. Although it seems that he can see them only because of his spiritual power, as it is not normal for him to be able to see them. The girls begin to attack, and Rio tells them that he only wants to talk to them. Although the leader is willing, before they can say anything, the other semi-humans find Latifa, who is asleep with spiritual magic, to prevent nightmares, and they believe Rio is a kidnapper. Then they all attack him together and manage to leave him unconscious. While he is in that state, he dreams of the girl who first explained to him how to use his powers and gave him basically all his power with a kiss. He asks her who she is, and she replies that she doesn't know, but she knows him, whom she calls Haradam, and she claims that he belongs to her. Then he sees me and starts screaming her name. At that moment, he wakes up. Hearing Rio's voice, Latifa runs to the room and hugs him worriedly. At that moment, an old woman who seems to be the leader of the place appears and apologizes, decides that the girls who captured him will be punished, and then removes Rio's shackles. The next day, the old woman shows him the great magical tree, the world tree, home of Dryas, the spirit of the trees. One can only reach it by mastering the spiritual arts. Then, he goes to the Council of Elders, and they apologize for the problems caused, thank him for freeing Latifa, and ask how to show their gratitude. So Rio asks them to take in Latifa, but he also asks to live there for a while to learn the spiritual arts, and the elders accept happily. At that moment, Dryas, the spirit of the trees, appears. Dryas tells Rio that he feels a spirit inside him and that he may have made a pact. Since Rio doesn't feel it, Dryas tells them that by making a pact with a spirit, you lose the ability to use magic, which explains a lot. Dryas touches Rio's face, and besides feeling a great amount of power, he realizes that there is a humanoid spirit inside him, which is unusual, as spirits usually take human forms like young Dryas. The spirit inside Rio could be one of the 6 great ones, who disappeared 1,000 years ago after the Divine Demonic War. Rio doesn't understand much of this, but the elders are surprised since it is a title even greater than that of Dryas. In the following days, Latifa and Rio have a wonderful time, and Rio learns about spiritual arts from Dryas. Meanwhile, the ambassador, along with a young man, searches for a giant blue egg, and the ambassador tells the young man that they are looking for something other than griffins that can improve the military potential of the Celestial Lions. A year has passed since Rio and Latifa arrived in the village. At an event, Rio will be recognized as an ally of the village, and Latifa as an official resident, through a kiss from Dryas. While they celebrate, Rio talks to the old woman, and they both rejoice that Latifa is already so much a part of the village. Rio tells the old woman that he will soon leave to continue his journey. Meanwhile, the ambassador leaves the young man with the stolen egg and beside the griffin, giving him a red pill, claiming that it will reveal his position. He asks him to take care of the griffin and leaves. Then we see that he only uses the young man as bait since a large flock of wyverns is heading towards him to retrieve the stolen egg. Meanwhile, the ambassador heads to the wyvern's cave to steal their eggs one by one. In the village, Rio tells Latifa that he will leave and that he cannot take her with him because of the dangers he must face, which infuriates the little girl. Meanwhile, the rest of the villagers have noticed changes in the barrier, so they begin to investigate what is happening. Then they find the young man with the griffin, and he, following the ambassador's orders, decides to flee on the griffin. However, he has to dodge the attacks of the semi-humans, and now he sees that there is a huge group of wyverns following him. The semi-humans split into 2 groups, one to prevent the griffin from heading towards the village because that way the wyverns will go there, the other, to eliminate the wyverns. When the ambassador has stolen all the eggs, he crushes the red pill, which immediately takes the life of the young man. In the end, it was a pill, not a stone, but well, in these anime shows, everything is similar. Latifah walks in the forest without knowing about any of this when the egg falls in front of her, breaks, and a wyvern gets angry with her because it believes she is the cause of the loss of its child. When the wyvern is about to attack her, one of its friends defends her, but she cannot hold it for long. Latifah decides to buy time so that it does not attack the village, but soon she is again facing its attacks. At that moment, Rio appears to save her and quickly takes her out of the forest. After leaving her in a safe place, Rio begins to fight the wyvern with nothing but his hands, which surprises Latifah's semi-human friend. In a short time, he defeats it, and when the rest of the group arrives, they are also surprised by the feat. When the first wyvern falls, the rest retreat because by nature, they do not fight if they do not believe they can win. For this, everyone thanks Rio, as he has saved the village. The next day, Rio and Latifah talk, and Latifah assures him that she will become strong for when he returns. Then Rio tells her about Yagumo and his family. Upon hearing about his past, Latifah decides to tell him a secret too and tells him that she had a life in Japan and reincarnated in that world. Rio tells her that the same thing happened to him and that he is also from Japan, but they do not connect the threads enough to realize that they had met on the bus. Finally, Rio leaves the village, thanking everyone for hosting him for so long. The elders give him a special sword and a wyvern skin suit that gives him more resistance and absorbs his spiritual art. Also, elixirs and food in abundance. The last elder gives him a temporal space bracelet. Then Rio stores only in that bracelet all the things from the journey, like a backpack in another space-time and without any weight. Finally, Rio arrives in Yagumo and is glad to see that everyone there has black hair, but after 4 days in the place, he has not yet found any clues about his parents. On the first day he arrives, he meets 2 young girls named Seo and Ruri, and asks to see the leader of the village, who turns out to be his grandmother, so they lead him to her. Rio has heard that the old woman knew many people who lived in that area, so she must be the right person to ask about his parents. When Rio mentions his parents' names, the old woman is surprised and tells him that she is his father's mother, in other words, Rio's grandmother. The old woman takes him to the graves and tells him that they fled the country in secret for reasons she cannot tell him at that moment, but she can do it later. Until then, she asks him to live there, with her, and Rio is happy because after all, they are family. Then he learns that Ruri is his cousin and she is 15 years old. The old woman assures him that she will hide his lineage from the rest of the village for some time. Rio gets up early in the morning and helps with the chores of the place. In addition, he takes care of cooking, demonstrating great culinary skills. While cooking, he learns that everyone there knows how to use spiritual arts, and when Rio shows some of the things he does, he leaves everyone amazed because not even his grandmother can use such advanced techniques. Later, at the grandmother's request, he meets with Shin, Seo's brother, and another man to hunt, demonstrating great skills in the house, angering Shin, who feels minimized in front of him. At another moment, Rio creates a large hot bath in front of his house with spiritual arts and surprises the girls, who ask him not to remove it. However, Shin appears and starts treating him badly for trying to show off as an outsider to the poor boy who seems like he will never be able to be calm without someone bothering him. As the days go by, Rio earns the affection of everyone and the hatred of Shin. One day, a group of men appears in front of the bathhouse and lecherously looks at Seo. Shin appears there to defend them but cannot do anything with his slim body in front of the giant man in front of him. The grandmother appears and tells him that he can stay in a guest cabin but not to repeat that behavior. When the man is leaving, he looks at Rio with contempt and tries to kick him, but Rio is so strong that it is he who is harmed, and he leaves without saying anything. Out of fear of the man, Seo decides to stay in the grandmother's house with Ruri. Rio gives them a red pill and tells them to place it in their room because it is an amulet. The men, on the other hand, have dark plans for their stay there. The next day, the tax inspector appears, and they get along great. One night, the giant man intrudes into the cabin while everyone is sleeping and tries to take advantage of Seo while threatening to hit Ruri if she intervenes. The red pill, which maybe now was indeed an amulet stone, shines, and then Rio appears, managing to hit the man until he gets out of the cabin. The situation with the girls reminded him of his mother's death, and he begins to hit him so hard that if the inspector had not intervened, he would have taken his life. The inspector orders the man to be arrested. Meanwhile, Ryo realizes that this is the second time he has almost taken someone's life, and he realizes that he is becoming more and more like the Haruto from the previous world. The next day, the inspector leaves with the prisoners, and the grandmother gives Ryo a letter to deliver to his father. Shin and Ryo also leave, and it takes them a few days to reach the royal capital of Karasuki. During this journey, and because he saved his sister, Shin becomes friends with Ryo and stops fighting him constantly. On another day, Ryo and Seo are sent to the capital to do some shopping, just because Shin wants Seo to try a particular noodle soup. There, they are mistaken for a couple, and although they clarify that they are not, Ryo buys Seo a gift to thank her for what she has done for him, a very expensive hairpin, which makes Seo blush. Then they hear screams and see that some men are trying to kidnap a girl named Komomo. Ryo saves her, the guards who were protecting her thank him, and Ryo leaves with Seo before they get into more trouble. The prosecutor delivers the letter that the old woman sent to his father, and as he reads it, the man is surprised and asks the prosecutor if he knew someone named Ryo. When Ryo and Seo return from shopping, they meet this man and his wife. They both tell him that they were servants of his mother and confess that his mother belonged to the royal family of Karasuki, which surprises Ryo. Then they tell him everything they know. 20 years ago, the kingdom was at war with a neighboring kingdom, and Ryo's father volunteered as a warrior because he had a natural gift for spiritual and martial arts. In a short time, he received the title of noble warrior. The father was the guard of Ryo's mother, and they gradually fell in love. One day the prince of the neighboring country had Ryo's mother kidnapped, but the father ruined his plans. Then the prince asked for his execution and asked for the mother's hand in marriage to achieve peace between the two nations. For that reason, his parents fled in secret with the help of the king. After finishing the story, the couple asks him to come to the castle to meet the king and queen, who would be Ryo's maternal grandparents. Once there, and after the greetings, they ask him how his parents lived and died. Ryo comments that his father died when he was still too young to remember him, and his mother when Ryo was 5 years old. She lost her life in front of Ryo's eyes at the hands of a man named Lucius, who apparently worked with his father as an adventurer. Although he generally helped them after his father's death, one day he appeared at their house, poisoned Ryo, and stabbed his mother. When Ryo woke up surviving the poison, he was already in the slums. He told the rest of his story, which is the one we already know, and ends it there. His grandfather asks him if he wants revenge, and Ryo assures that he does, although the grandfather advises him not to seek it because it poisons the soul. Ryo says that if he meets Lucius, he will end him even if he has to dirty his hands. Later, they ask him to practice with the man who was looking for him, named Gookie. When they head to the back of his house, they encounter Komomo, who seems to be Gookie's daughter and the other girl, and then they find out that it was Ryo who saved her life. Then they both face each other and show enormous potential, but Ryo ends up winning to everyone's surprise because Gookie is the strongest warrior in the village. Ryo returns to the village, and together with his grandmother, they decide to confess Ruri about Ryo's lineage and history. After this, Ryo tells both of them that he plans to leave the village in a year to return to Yagumo and visit another place along the way, which is the World Tree, because he wants to see Latifa again. In the following days, Ryo continues with his normal life, hunting, helping with household chores, but also teaching some farming techniques to the other villagers so they can continue doing it when he leaves. Sometime before leaving, Ryo secretly tells Seo that he plans to leave when autumn ends, which greatly saddens the girl, who can't help but cry in front of him. When Seo arrives home, she starts crying heavily, and Shin, who sees her in that state, cannot help but want to defend her. But then Seo tells him that Ryo will leave the village, and Shin runs off to ask him to please stay in the village. Embarrassed, Seo stops him, and they both leave, apologizing. Everyone pretends to be oblivious as if none of that had happened. At the Harvest Festival, Seo confesses her love to Ryo and tells him that she is in love with him. Ryo tells her that he cannot reciprocate those feelings, partly because he will leave the village, but not only because of that. Seo asks him to take her with him, as she has been training hard for the past 6 months and studying spiritual arts to be able to accompany him without being a burden. However, Ryo continues to affirm that he cannot reciprocate her feelings and leaves. For himself, he apologizes to Shin, and Shin, hidden behind the tree, gets angry that Ryo realized something. I'm not sure what. Finally, the day of departure arrives, and Ryo says goodbye to everyone. Then he arrives at the World Tree and reunites with Latifa and his old friends. After catching up, he asks the elders if he can build a house that can be taken in the temporal storage device. The elders assure him that they will find a way and tell him to enjoy the months he will spend time with Latifa and the rest of his friends. One day, he wakes up and finds a woman beside him as naked as the day she was born, and he doesn't understand anything of what is happening. After the expected frying and misunderstandings, Ryo and the girls ask the naked girl who she is. Half asleep, the girl claims she's the spirit with whom Ryo made the pact, and she calls him Haruto. Feeling calmer, they ask her how they made that pact, but she doesn't know. Then they ask her what her name is, but the girl doesn't know either, and she asks Ryo to give her a name to be by his side. The girls believe everything that's happening but don't fully understand how it works. So they ask Ryo why he calls her Haruto, and Ryo says he'll explain later. The girl starts communicating telepathically with Ryo, and they both talk that way. Then the girl tells him that she knows everything about Haruto, about his past life, but she'll call him Ryo in front of everyone else. Ryo looks at her closely and she reminds him of me, the girl he was always in love with. So he decides to call her Aishia, which means warm spring. Later, he goes to see Dryas and the elders, and Dryas assures them that spirits should remember their lives before ascension, so it's strange, she also can't identify what kind of spirit she is. When they ask about Haruto, Ryo says that's what they called him in the village where he used to live and where they're looking for him, so they decide not to ask anymore. When Aishia comments that she can handle all the elements of spiritual arts, everyone around her is surprised because it's unheard of. So they make Ryo fight with his spirit to find out how strong Aishia is. In the fight, both of them demonstrate their great abilities, and everyone thinks Aishia isn't even showing her full potential. Despite seeing her great strength, she has many spiritual shortcomings, so they decide to teach her about them. In the following days, Aishia and Ryo spend a lot of time training until one day the old dwarf tells him that he has finished building his portable house, which means Ryo can leave in 2 days. Upon hearing this, Latifa decides to spend a night with him talking intimately, and they talk about their past lives, where they realize they were both on the bus that crashed. Before leaving, the elders give him a teleportation crystal that takes him to a specific location, and it's configured to take him directly to the village. They also give him a jewel that allows him to change his hair color in case he's being sought after from his previous village. Ryo plans to visit Celia because she has only sent him letters all this time. After changing his hair color, he heads to Celia's office, but she's not there. Then he finds out that the next day will be Celia's wedding to Charles, the man who tortured Ryo before, and he can't believe it. The man who gives them information tells them it's a marriage of convenience because the Proxia Empire crushed the Beltram Kingdom overwhelmingly. Thanks to the actions of Charles's house, even though they barely managed to start peace negotiations, the royal family lost all authority. When the blame fell on the king's family, they had to leave the capital, and Charles's family seized the moment to take power. For that, they have chosen Celia's house to gain strength. Ryo wonders if Celia really wants this marriage, and Aishia decides to find Celia so they can talk in person. While having dinner with Celia's father, Charles tells him he should be careful because there are rumors that the father has secret contact with Duke Huguenot who fled the kingdom. Although the father denies it, Charles insists that it affects trust in him, and he claims that the marriage to Celia is to protect the reputation of his house from such slanders. In a completely cold manner, Charles threatens his father-in-law, who becomes enraged but has no other choice. He also feels guilty for dragging Celia into this position. Celia is about to burn Ryo's letter when he appears in her room. Seeing him there, Celia hugs him and bursts into tears. Then they have a moment of romantic tension, and Celia invites him to have tea in her room while she tells him everything she has been through. However, Ryo gets straight to the point and asks her if she really wants the wedding. Although Celia hates it, it's for the good of her family, but she decides not to confess it to Ryo and tells him that Charles is kind to women and is good in his private life. Then she kindly asks him to leave and not attend the wedding. Ryo leaves but decides to keep investigating. The wedding day arrives, and the ambassador meets with Charles. As they talk, the ambassador gets excited because he feels the presence of a spirit. When Celia finishes putting on her dress, Charles calls her to introduce her to his other 7 wives and then leaves them alone. The wives treat her quite hostilely, but Celia stands her ground. Then Princess Christina appears to visit her. After catching up, Christina tells her that she couldn't leave the palace until now because of the controls of Charles's family. Then, Christina apologizes to Celia because her family's incompetence led Celia to this situation, as it's clear she doesn't want to marry Charles. The wedding ceremony begins, and the carriage parades through the city with the newlyweds. Through Aisha, Rio tells Celia that he's there, which makes the teacher happy and sad at the same time. As Charles and Celia are about to step out of the carriage, Rio starts beating the guards, one by one, attracting everyone's attention. Despite that, Charles isn't afraid because he has too many guards and of the highest ranks, but Rio manages to destroy them in a few seconds. Then he confronts Charles and delivers a powerful punch to his stomach, knocking him to the ground. After that, he takes Celia hostage, threatening her with his dagger. While the high-ranking officials start sending orders to all the knights to stop the perpetrator, Rio communicates telepathically with Celia. After asking her what she truly desires, he tells her that he knows she's being threatened by Charles's family. If she wishes, she can avoid that wedding and make herself happy because he holds her in high regard. Although she feels guilty for putting her desires before her family's well-being, Celia confesses that she doesn't want that marriage and asks Rio to take her away from there. This is also done telepathically, of course. Pretending to seek revenge on Charles, Rio claims that he's taking Celia to humiliate him. Then all the knights go against him, but he defends himself and easily avoids them. The ambassador realizes that it could be Rio and launches a powerful attack to test his reaction, but Rio manages to counter it with skill and escapes. The ambassador starts to enjoy this because Rio is stronger than before, and he can also sense the presence of his spirit, which catches his attention. A group of griffins ridden by soldiers quickly pursues Rio, which is not easy to evade. However, this was anticipated, and Rio leaves Celia with Aisha, saying that she will take her out of the capital, and they will reunite later while he acts as a decoy. Rio continues his path without Celia, giving the knights an opportunity to attack without fear of harming her. Despite that, Rio manages to stop and defeat them without taking anyone's life. Then Alfred, the king's sword, appears ready to face him. They start fighting, and Rio realizes that Alfred is too strong, especially because Rio isn't fighting with all his strength because he doesn't want to hurt him. Alfred then imbues his sword with powerful magic and launches an attack so strong that it destroys the street. Not seeing even a trace of Rio, he realizes that he has fled and orders the other knights to search for him. Rio appears on a mountain, where Aisha and Celia are waiting, believing that the situation has finally ended, and they talk about future plans, etc. Then large colorful rays start falling from the sky. Aisha seems to understand what it's about and asks Rio to help them, I don't know who, promising that she will take care of Celia. And so, the anime that has created so many emotions comes to an end. I hope that in future episodes, the answers won't take long to arrive. If you like this series, let me know in the comments. For my part, I bid farewell until next time, always reminding you that you can subscribe to my channel at any time and be part of this wonderful community. See you next time.